free from regret. Preparing to dive, Gyoki then suddenly turned his eye to where Dee stood at the shore. "You wanted to know who made me, didn't you? Baron Meinster gave me life, but I was perfected by the other one." His body sank straight into the water. Soon splashing could be heard far in the distance, but that was the end of it. He must have swum out into the sea at a depth of 7,000 feet. Perhaps certain that his foe was gone for good, Dee returned his longsword to its sheath and walked over towards Su-in. The circle of light from the illumination cord made her location clear in this murk. She was a bit further in than where he'd left her. Though he'd told her to stay there, it would have been hard to imagine a courageous character like Su-in just standing there, awaiting her fate. Still, it was strange. If she were to go anywhere else, she most certainly should have gone to check on Dee, on whom her life depended. But she seemed to have done exactly the reverse and gone in the opposite direction. Dee's pace quickened. Su-in was standing in front of a huge tank they hadn't seen before. Unlike the others, this one was filled with a milky fluid, and it had but a single occupant, a young man who was completely naked. Black and blue marks could be seen on the side that faced her. At a glance, it was apparent these weren't wounds that had been intentionally inflicted on him, but rather had come about through some sudden event. The left side of his forehead was smashed open horribly, leaving a gaping wound you could see through if you looked hard enough. It was almost miraculous that his face had been so perfectly preserved, appearing just as youthful now as it had in life. His left shoulder was also twisted into a strange position, probably the result of a broken bone. No doubt these wounds were all the result of a fall from a considerable height. Judging by his face, he was a young villager, but who would have sealed up his remains more than 1,000 years ago? Not seeming to realize that Dee was watching her, Su-in kept her gaze trained on the pale, hazy figure. Before long she muttered, "You fell, didn't you?" The way she said the words, they seemed to simply spring into being without ever passing through her thought processes. "You fell. Fell at the cape. Stabbed. Through the chest." Dee looked at the young man's chest. There was no wound there. Su-in had been talking about someone else. "Let's go home," Dee told her. They had more than enough time until her grandfather's funeral, but considering the way they'd come down, the thought of going back up made a casual term like trip seem horribly inadequate. Su-in's body trembled, but before she even had time to think about it, her flesh broke free of her will and she leaned back in Dee's arms. Quickly taking the illumination cord, Dee looked at Su-in's blanched countenance and then shifted his eyes to the contents of the tank. A corpse floating in a milky liquid and a fisherman's daughter. Perhaps the young man's cold eyes could see the thread that joined these two very different lives. But that thread was soon frayed by a tiny groan. Opening her eyes in the hunter's powerful arms, Su-in realized the situation she was in and hurriedly tried to stand up. The hue in her eyes as she turned them away from Dee was ultimately conveyed by the pink that tinged her full cheeks. "Trying to take advantage of me in a place like this? You should be ashamed," she said, pushing Dee's hands away with much more force than was necessary. When she got to